Today I'm going to talk about a bit of Pennsylvania state history. The topic? The time that Western Pennsylvania revolted from the federal government. Let's get into it. I don't know about you guys, but in school, the time immediately after the American Revolution was entirely glossed over, which is really dumb. You see, it's not as simple as America just gets good. In fact, the early American government wasn't really effective at all. Why was it so ineffective? Well, simple. Taxes. The American people had just fought a war whose main catalyst was unfair taxation. Why would they accept new taxes? As you'll come to find out, they will not. So in the early 1790s, Alexander Hamilton began to push for a tax on a very widely consumed product at the time. Whiskey. Now, a whiskey tax would probably be pretty unpopular in a country that makes it. So, at the time, President Washington decided it would be best to poll the population of Pennsylvania and Virginia. Surprisingly, they agreed to the tax. They thought it would be a great idea. Washington then went to Congress and informed them that the bill would be very popular and that they should proceed with the plan immediately. However, there were some small issues that began to be very problematic. For example, big producers got tax breaks and only paid 6 cents per gallon. Small producers had to pay 9 cents a gallon, and they also had to pay in cash, which, in a country that has not printed any cash, this is going to be extremely problematic. And it was, particularly in western Pennsylvania. Tension between locals and tax collectors began to brew, and often altercations went a little something like this. Hey, you, local whiskey distiller, you haven't paid your taxes today. What's that about? Well, they're completely unfair. Why would I pay them? You don't charge big producers anything compared to us. Well, man, that's the rules. You gotta pay them, or you're under arrest. You know, I don't think I am. Fair assessment. The threats of violence eventually manifested in an ambush on the local tax collector Robert Johnson, who was ambushed by 11 men dressed as women who tarred and feathered him. Naturally, he was pretty mad and sent out a warrant for the men, which was served by a cattle drover named John Connor, who was also immediately tarred and feathered. Violence like this would continue afterwards, and effectively, the Whiskey Rebellion had begun. The first serious battle was the attack on Bower Hill. A landowner named John Neville was guiding a tax collector through the area when a group of armed men who had become angry with the tax collector surrounded his house and ordered him to hand over the man. Neville informed the men that they had to disperse, and when they did not, he shot one of them, and a brief firefight ensued between Neville's slaves and the men. Fortunately for Neville, the men retreated after sustaining some injuries, and he actually got some help from a local soldier group. However, he would not maintain the streak of good luck, as later upwards of 700 soldiers showed up at his property, forcing Neville to flee, at which they burned his house to the ground. Now in open rebellion, the militia went on a rampage and soon discovered letters from Pittsburgh condemning their rebellion. The now 7,000-strong army decided that they would pay the city a visit in hopes of maybe continuing their rampage. Fortunately, the city of Pittsburgh had a little bit more level heads and decided that it would be best to try to broker a peace with the rebels. Their peace offer? Barrels of whiskey. The rebels happily accepted this and soon became drunk on the whiskey, and instead of invading the city, decided it would be best to just kind of meander through it and not stop and break anything. Meanwhile, in D.C., George Washington was becoming rather infuriated with the news of the rebellion, and he began to muster an army. Soon he had collected up to 12,000 militiamen and was planning on marching to western Pennsylvania to quell this insurrection. This is it. The U.S. Army is about to suppress a rebellion and prove its authority. One of the greatest battles of the world is about to begin. Except that didn't happen because the Whiskey Rebellion soldiers immediately surrendered at the sight of the well-trained militia. Apparently, it wasn't that big of a deal to them, and they just kind of gave up. In the end, all parties were pardoned, and no punishments were given out for any of the traitors. And ever since then, there's never, ever been another massive rebellion. The end.